Hello everybody, this is Paul Sims speaking to you from eyeforpharma, and welcome to the Develop Your Engagement Framework to Facilitate Patient Interactions Throughout Your Company webinar. As I said, my name is Paul Sims. I'm really pleased to be moderating today's session because this is a topic which is very near to my heart and one which I believe is absolutely crucial for our industry. The aim today is to understand how we can actually improve the volume of patient engagement in our companies. And by volume, I mean both quantity and quality, by making it both easy, better designed, and of course, maintaining compliance and ethics as we go about producing these frameworks. This is obviously one of the most important topics that we have in our industry today. And it's one that you also agree with me on that one, as about 1,300 people in the end have signed up for this session. So really pleased that you could all be here with us. I'm speaking to you from London today, and I've actually realized that, certainly not by design, we've got 4 Brits on the line today. I've actually hosted probably 50 webinars in the last couple of years. It's the first time that's happened, and of course, being British, I have to apologize for that fact. And I imagine some of you will think that this session is going to sound a bit like an episode of Downton Abbey, but rest assured that we have a lot of global experience in the room today. And of course, many of the principles that we're going to talk about apply globally and universally. And personally, I'm very, very confident that we do indeed have the right people in the room. You'll be able to see on your screen, hopefully, Guy Yeoman on the top left there. Guy I would describe as a grandee of the patient space within pharma, and he made a lot of waves recently by being the lead in an academic study which defined what patient-centricity really means and practically how we need to work going forward. If you want to know more about that, we've actually been writing about it on the eyeforpharma website, so search there for Guy's name and you'll find a bit more information. Guy is actually part of the Global Medical Affairs function at AstraZeneca and has been a VP of Medical Evidence and the Medical Director of Asia Pacific region before assuming his current role. And I have to say, I think he's a very knowledgeable man indeed. So great that he could be here. On the top right, you will see Emma Sutcliffe. Now, Emma sent me her bio prior to today's session, but I'm largely going to ignore it and tell you instead that Emma is, in fact, a great friend and an extremely talented individual. Probably quicker to actually tell you the things that she doesn't do than the things that she does. She describes herself as a medical writer, but in reality is a lot more. She's a medical biochemist, completing a PhD in the impact of social media on medicine and long-term illness. She's absolutely a fighter in many forms for the patient voice, and indeed writes a great column on the eyeforpharma website, which you should check out if you haven't already. Emma also works as an independent consultant in pharma companies. You may have actually seen she was mentioned as Grunenthal on the website, as she did a major piece of work there. And recently she's been helping several companies and has published a 10-point patient engagement framework, which I'm sure she will express to you today. Now, of course, at NextGen Healthcare, she heads up the Patient Services Division, and you'll hear more about that, I'm sure. Emma, by the way, recently brought her daughter to speak with her at the eyeforpharma Barcelona conference, which was incredibly well received, and I think she has a great understanding of what patients require. So Ruth on the bottom left. Ruth is Global Head of Patient Advocacy at Teva. She is one of our foremost experts in relationship management and stakeholder management, and she's already carved a great reputation for making a difference at Teva. And indeed, relationship management has been her craft for many years, including 6 years at Pfizer in a very important role there. She's also spent a number of years in public health roles, for example, in smoking cessation. So I'm sure that a lot of her expertise is brought from those functions as well. So I think you'd agree with me, I hope you do, that we have a pretty strong lineup today. I'd like to get straight on now with the session, but of course doing that means that I'd like to get you as listeners involved. I'm very well aware that we've got a good-sized audience today, approximately 70% of you from pharma companies, but also a lot of agencies and consultants who I want to hear from, and some patient groups who I'm particularly keen to hear from as well. So I'm expecting you all to be very familiar with the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. In fact, say a little hello through there now so I can check you're paying attention. And I'm hoping really that everybody asks at least one question over the course of the next hour. Today's session is about engagement. I guess if we're not engaging you, then we're probably doing something wrong. So thank you to those of you who are writing in. So yeah, would absolutely love to involve you as much as possible in the conversation. But the first thing we're going to do is actually ask you a poll question, a multiple choice poll question. So if you look at your screen now, I'm just going to launch this. I've got a question for you. Sorry, just reading out. What is the most important element required to achieve universal patient engagement within your company? Now, I'm going to be particularly mean here and force you to choose only one of these, which I realize is perhaps a little tricky, but it will polarize you a little bit. Senior level buy-in or sponsorship, a clear engagement framework for all employees. That's obviously the topic of today. Let's hope a few people choose that one. A patient-first internal culture. We've often talked about how culture comes first. Dedicated roles for patient interaction. We need a department, a central team, or indeed strong legacy relationships with patient groups and stakeholders. So I imagine it's not the easiest choice that you're going to have to make, but I'm going to force you to choose one. I can see that about 52% of you have voted so far. I'll hold it open for 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at the results. Thank you for those who voted. Okay, well, the culture indeed does eat strategy for breakfast because it is the #1 choice. A third of you, just over a third of you, pumping for that. But in second place is the main focus for today's session, a clear engagement framework, and closely followed both by the senior level buy-in and the strong relationships. Interesting that only 10%, 1 out of 10 of you, think of dedicated roles for patient interaction as being the most important thing. So clearly a lot of you believe that this is everybody's responsibility, or at least a large group of people's responsibility within the companies. So some very interesting results there, and I suppose I'd like to start by inviting our panelists now to give a quick comment on that, and also perhaps to talk about what they believe to be the important framework of the important principles of good patient engagement. So let's start with Guy, as he's top left on the screen there. Guy, any reaction to what you've seen, and can you give us some sense of what's happening at AstraZeneca?
Yeah, not delighted to, Paul, and thanks for the introduction. I've been called many things, but never grandee. I feel in the patient-centered space we've still very much got our learner plates on, and I'm very much have mine in place. And I think this was a really impossible question to answer, to distill
I didn't say I was going to be nice.
No, exactly. Down to one of these. And I don't think the results are particularly surprising, and I think they probably reflect the fact that we are at the beginning of this journey, and I think we are very much at the beginning of this journey. And I think that cultural piece is a critical component, as well as the senior level buy-in. Before you actually start defining the engagement framework, and equally, relationships with patients, absolutely critical, because you can't be patient-centered if you don't have relationships with patients. And I agree, dedicated roles for patient interaction. I think some companies may well start off with dedicated roles, but ultimately this needs to be embedded into business process, and everybody or every team across the life cycle needs to engage with patients in an appropriate and effective manner. So we started at AstraZeneca a couple of years ago. We formed a small team, a patient-centric team, or PACE team for short. And we decided a couple of years ago to go right back to the simple basics. What are we fundamentally trying to do here? And so we started talking to patients. And we got a gathering of patients in Europe and North America, and we said, we think this is what it's all about. And I have to say, it was a painful experience because it was not aligned with the patient perspective. And we heard one very clear message, which was your industry needs to stop focusing solely on the what it does and needs to start focusing on the how you do it. Because if you get the how piece right, then the what becomes so much more meaningful for us as patients. And we're more likely to want to participate in your research, and we're more likely to want to take your medicines. So we decided that it would be really useful to define and capture what patient-centricity is all about. And the culmination of that work was published in BMJ Innovations a couple of months ago. And it's very much a collaborative definition of the principles of patient-centricity. And there were three common pieces to that definition. Patients want an open and sustained relationship with us, not a simple transactional relationship where they're in the dark. They want to know what's going on. They want to have that transparency. And the second component, they also want to be treated with respect and compassion. A patient is not a commodity. They're an individual with an illness. And they want to be treated with respect, so when they give us their opinion, we need to respect that, act on it or not act on it, but be completely transparent about why we haven't acted on it and inform them accordingly. And the compassion piece is really important as well. So if you're setting up a meeting for a day with a patient, don't pack it in with a 9-hour meeting and a working lunch. That's not treating the patient in a compassionate way. And the final component of this definition was about ensuring that we deliver an experience and outcome for the patient and their family that they want, not necessarily that we want them to have. So there are three very important principles that we caught in the definition. But they are principles, and they help to define the how piece of patient engagement, but they're not the framework for how you do it. And so we've also generated a generic framework that hopefully abides by those principles. So whenever, it doesn't matter where you are in the life cycle, it's equally applicable. So you look to define the problem from the patient perspective, really understand the insight and needs from the patient. Before you move on to the co-creation of the solution with the patient, and then the final piece of the framework is actually measuring the impact that's meaningful to the patient. And that's a generic framework that sits above the principles of the definition that we're working to here at AstraZeneca.
Thank you, Guy. Very comprehensive overview there. I hope everybody was taking some notes because I think there was a lot of good information. Emma, shall we go to you next, as I know that you've put together some thoughts on this.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to contribute to this. A patient-first staff culture. I mean, how do we, as sedulous scientists in the pharma industry, how do we actually adjust to an era of patient-driven culture? It's a huge ask. And this webinar today is about the reality of creating a patient-driven culture within our four walls. I think the first thing I'd like to make a point about is that people come to us with illness, with wellness, and actually the medical community and the pharmaceutical industry, we turn people into patients. And I think the first thing that we need to do to be able to adjust to a patient-driven culture is recognize that we need to be helping people with their lives. It's not about turning people into patients, but seeing what the patient needs are. In fact, a couple of years ago, last year at your patient summit, the eyeforpharma patient summit, this question was asked, and one of the responses was quite enlightening in that 21% of pharma execs know they had to create a meaningful patient engagement program, but fewer than 5% of patients actually believe that pharma could do it beyond hype. So this is how we are linked on this webinar today. So we recognize that we need to create a patient-driven culture, but we don't have the infrastructure to do it. So we've got to be relentless and keep looking internally to see what to do. What we've got is a situation where we're trying to connect with people who now consume medicine. So what we're trying to do is increase connections with groups, provide social proving, provide ways that people can give us their data about living with a condition. So a patient-driven culture starts from looking at it in terms of how do we help people to live their lives before we turn them into patients. So from the recent example working with Grunenthal, they took a risk, really. They took a risk inviting somebody like me, who is vociferous and candid and lobbied on the patient voice. And literally I had a call from Mark Field, who's the head of the pain unit, and he said, can you come and speak to us in Grunenthal? Can you come and meet with us and speak to the most senior people in our organisation? Can you give a real world perspective on what we think people need and want? And that was a big risk, because he allowed me to tell it to them straight. So he organised meetings for me with the CSO, Klaus Langer, with the exiting CEO, Eric Paul Pax, and then the new CEO, Gabriel Bertschi. And he invited me to tell Grunenthal what it was like outside their walls for people living in pain and in chronic pain conditions. That was a very candid set of conversations. So I would say that if you want to create a patient-driven culture, take the risk, as Mark Field did, and bring in patients, bring in patient advocates, let them tell it to you straight so that pharma companies see the people and don't turn them into patients.
Thank you, Emma. I think that was a pretty defiant call there. So Ruth, over to you, and I'll let you come in and any comments on the question as well.
Thank you so much, and as echoed by the other panelists, thank you so much for inviting me and to play a role in today's discussion. I think one of the things that I would say first of all is when I first joined Teva 2 years ago, I think the answer I would have given to this question is different to the answer I give today. I must confess that when I joined Teva from Pfizer, I was very much in the dedicated roles for patient interaction as being a really primary responsibility. And I'm sitting here today just reflecting on how much maybe it's an evolution, maybe it's a recognizing in the changes of pharma and the needs of advocacy have changed. But when I joined, I very much realized that every company needs to develop something that is individual to them and also to the patient populations that they're working with. Likewise, it needs to be broader than just the individuals who are using the medicines. It also needs to incorporate those who are caring for the patients, the family members. And so I guess my answer today would be a patient-first internal culture, and obviously we're talking about the framework as well. I think there's also a big difference between saying the word patient first and the actions that are then realized within the companies. And I think it's a challenge for many areas of the pharmaceutical business to actually sort of really realize and articulate what it is they're able to do that backs up saying that they're patient first. Obviously, I've come into Teva to help build a centralized function for advocacy and patient engagement. And a bit like Guy was outlining, we also have a group that talks about what it is we need to do as a company. The difference that I think we have is that I started very much with the external perspective, and I work with 17 or 18 global or regional advocates, the individuals that represent the people taking Teva medicine, and very much open the doors to them to come in and meet with our senior leadership in order to be able to have some of those painful and difficult conversations. And very early on they told us that what they wanted was, if they were going to be the end product, they also wanted to be there at the beginning and not just at the end. They wanted this very early engagement, but the early engagement also had to be a partnership. It wasn't just about talking about what our plans were. It was very much about how do we have a partnership, and we've moved as a result more to working hand in hand with our patient partners. And we are very much recognizing that it's the groups that represent the individuals who take our medicines, as well as the engagement with those who are taking the medicines and this wider community that they have. And so very much the strategies that we've taken forward is about early engagement. What does hand-in-hand partnership actually look like? And how do we increase that patient voice so that we can ensure that not only are our colleagues at Teva enabled to have conversations, whether that's through a patient support program, whether that's through the social media activities we do around our customer engagement. Not only are they enabled to do that confidently and appropriately and through the right governance, but we also have a council of external views that are helping us remember that we are working with a vibrant population who are only ill for parts of their lives. And as Emma said, it's about health and wellness and working before people become ill and ensuring that that patient voice is increased at the senior level as well.
Thank you, Ruth. So all of our panelists have set out some principles and some guidelines there, I think, and given us a flavour for what they're doing in their own organisations, or in Emma's case, across other organisations as well, which is great. Takes us on to the next question, really. I'm going to ask one more of these poll questions and try and get a sort of sense of where everybody's actually at the moment. So if you look in front of your screen, in terms of an engagement framework, and I realise I'm generalising here very broadly by using that phrase, what do you have in place currently? So I want to just, again, you've got to choose just one of these, and I want to just get a sense. I realise, you know, the question's not perfect and the answer's not going to be perfect either, but just give us a sense of where you're at. Obviously, if you're from an agency, then do reply on behalf of the clients that you work with, and if you're from a patient group, I'd almost like to see how you consider things to be, or would guess things to be from your angle. So let's hold that open for another few seconds. We've got a clear, well supported, that's obviously the best at the top. Currently implementing, so certainly in progress. At the design stage, so still really in the planning. Then we've got a sporadic, variable pockets of good progress in some geographies or some therapies. And then finally, our organisation doesn't believe in such a plan. So you've got no intentions to actually create such a universal framework. So let's hold that open. I can see we've got about 60% of votes in. 3, 2, 1. Come on, everyone. There we go. Thank you. Let's have a look. Okay, so as Guy said, we are in the early stages. I think we can see here. There is, however, a good 12% of you feeling that you are ahead of the game and you have something in place. That's, I suppose, quite confident boosting. So that gives a sense of where we are. I want to go on to some practical questions for our panelists. I want you to, with slightly briefer answers this time, give me an idea of your biggest do and your biggest don't when it comes to putting an engagement framework into place. So I'm going to go ask each one of you to speak briefly on and just be specific on your biggest do and biggest don't. So if you don't mind. Guys, should we start with you again?
No, thanks, Paul. And the results here don't surprise me. I think one of the questions that that probably could have been added as an answer is the pockets within functions. So we have a couple of functions that are particularly good at patient engagement, digital being one. And I think that reflects the fact that a lot of people from digital have come from outside the industry and really understand the importance of the consumer. I think for me, it's about the three bits to get right in terms of the patient engagement framework. I think the first right is getting the right remit. The second is getting the right people and building the right networks. And then the third is about the right process. And I think that the remit has to be right in terms of how you do what needs to be done in terms of the structures that you put in place. If you do want a dedicated team to enable teams to do this, how do you empower them to be effective across the organization? And if you're going to have such a group like we have here at AstraZeneca, don't be exclusive. I don't call them the centre of excellence. Implied excellence doesn't occur outside of that group, and very often it does. It absolutely does. what you're trying to do is to make patient engagement systemic across the organisation and build the capability. The second right is right people. You can achieve so much with a few good people who are passionate, committed, enterprise-wide, great communicators, and the networks that they build are so important. We've done that with country patient-centric champions that we connect with through a clear network. We have a dedicated governance group with all the respective functions that are in there. And we also have some functions who are further down the transformation process who have their own dedicated patient-centered resource who are extended members of the team. And the final right is the right process. And don't be over-ambitious here. This is going to take years to do. And I think there are three basic phases. But the first phase, which I think most of us are at, is about delivering and working out how to engage patients properly and effectively with the right pilots to demonstrate the value. Putting in place the infrastructure that enables teams to connect with patients, and there's a whole underlying piece of that, and actually enabling teams to connect with patients very quickly, very easily, on a one-on-one perspective, but also through online communities. So hopefully that was briefly enough for you, Paul.
You did stretch it slightly, but fortunately they were definitely useful comments there, guys, so I appreciate it. I'm getting lots of good questions coming in, but I'm also seeing a lot of people who haven't asked anything yet, so please do continue to send those in and I will get around to them in just a moment. But Emma, any comments on this and also your favourite do and don't? And I think you also have something to say about early engagement as well.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about that comment that Guy just made about being overambitious, because on that same spectrum, you know, the big management challenge inside Pharma's walls are does your commitment match your ambition? So even if you've got a very ambitious patient engagement program, do you have the internal resources to match your ambition, whatever level of ambition that you have on patient engagement? You know, really what we need to do is create patient engagement systems that are simple, and I like to make it as simple as the ABC. So do you have an infrastructure, a resourcing that will allow you to have a good customer and patient experience that speaks to the ABC? And that would be, do you have a system of engagement where you can have awareness, that's the A of the customer's needs, behavioural change support, can you actually help them to change their behaviours, that's the B, and C, can you provide care and contribution services that will be enduring? So the ABC is about awareness, behavioural change support, and then continuity of services to patients. We cannot feast and famine on patient engagement. There has to be continuous contribution services. They have to be enduring. So my do's and don'ts would be as simple as this. Do you have an ABC on patient engagement? What is your ambition?
Thank you, Emma. Do you want to say anything about the early engagement point as well?
Well, you know, we have to have early engagement. It's congruent also, and let's put the kind of elephant in the room front and centre. We have a business need in pharmaceutical in the industry. We have to be mindful of the cost burden of development. So the earlier that we engage with patients and the earlier we have advocacy, that is congruent then to the business needs of the company. We've got huge attrition in drug development. It's high. Only 16% of compounds still make it through. So if we start engaging with patients earlier and we have better solutions for their needs, then we can actually make some differences in that attrition in drug development. So I'm really delighted to see that patient engagement is now starting at the R&D level, not just once the drug is coming through a clinical development pipeline. And I think the sooner that we have engagement with patients and start to get that ABC, what are their needs, how can we change their behaviours, how can we have enduring services, we need to start early, and the value of increased early engagement cannot be underestimated.
Thank you, Emma. So Ruth.
God, so much wisdom has been said already. It's interesting coming third in a conversation, because I support everything that is being said. I think for me, at Teva, one of the quotes that we heard so clearly from our patient partners when we opened the doors at the beginning were very much a sort of, if we're the end product, we should be the partners at the beginning and not just the end. And this has really struck with me, and I know this echoes a little bit of what Emma is talking about, but for me it is the beginning, middle and end. But that isn't just, I think we have to, as companies and people taking the patient first agenda forward in our companies, really have to understand what that means for our company. At Teva, obviously there is an R&D program, and there is a beginning there for the early engagement in R&D, but we are also developing patient support programs, and there is a beginning at the point where we are hearing that insight to understand what the realities of living with a condition and understanding the realities of taking our medicine. And so for us, the beginning is about ensuring that it is genuinely at the beginning of any given activity that we are doing, which is we're developing, and we develop those hand in hand. But also what we're developing is real, and I think my colleagues both outlined that it also needs to be sustainable. And when we look at that sort of that middle stage, that can be very much about how does the relationship evolve, and the recognition that actually there is an ongoing evolution to living with a condition, and also the environment within which that individual or their caregivers or their family and friends are existing within, and what does that mean to the healthcare system. I think that this is an area which we sometimes get stuck and we think, well, actually we've done this, we've got the patient voice, but we have to continue as pharma to recognise that the individuals that take our medicines and live with conditions, their environment is changing, and so as a result we have to as well. And then I'm always struck by the fact that the quote I mentioned talks about not just at the end, because once again, what does that mean for an individual company? Is it about actually exiting a relationship, or is that just about the prescription, or is it actually about the individual feeling better? And so the do's and don'ts for me is to actually, for us as the people taking this agenda forward, to really understand what it is we're trying to do, and when we put it in a patient-first perspective, ensuring that that voice is always heard and the evolution of that voice is heard, however painful, however gritty, however real it is, and enabling us as a company and as an industry to actually change to the needs of the patient populations we're here to serve.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm getting a lot of questions in about legal ethics and compliance, which we will address later on, and also a few questions about measurements, which again I'm going to be addressing very shortly. An interesting question from Nicole Yinkst is, senior buy-in can be a challenge to procure resources and funding to support these kind of initiatives. Do the panel have any carrots or any core information that you were able to share within your organizations that solidified that senior buy-in and support? Do any of you have any tips on that one?
So it's really clear from my perspective at Teva, when I was very keen at the beginning of my my role here is to open the door, and I was fortunate enough to secure our senior leadership, which we refer to as the tech, to actually attend that meeting, and so with the appropriate negotiation, they heard at the same time as I did. So I think there's also early engagement for the C-suite, the senior leaders as well, to make sure that they're actually hearing that voice. And it might not be in a full meeting, but there are opportunities to ensure that they get to hear that voice, and it's really important for them to hear it themselves.
And I can give a perspective on that, Paul, as well.
Go for it.
I can give a perspective on that as well. So I mentioned pilots. I think piloting activity is really important to demonstrate the value. And I can talk through a case study example that we went through over the last couple of years. So probably one of the functions that's most further down the line is in development here. And I think one of the reasons why is because of the learning process we've been through development, and as a result, the senior level buy-in we've achieved. So when we started again, it's a couple of years ago, you have to be incredibly pushy to get a pilot up and running. So we identified a simulation of a study visit, part of a protocol for a particular study, something that we wanted to do and invest in. The clinical team was saying, no way are we going to do this, there's no value, we understand what patients want, the investigator will tell us which areas that we don't. But we pushed really hard. We ended up paying for it, we ended up setting it up and running it with the clinical operations team. And basically we took a group of patients to an investigator site, we simulated the visits. We got 24 recommendations, 16 were adopted into the clinical study delivery. An hour was shaved off the visit duration, over $1 million of costs were stripped out of the study, and that study is now delivering way in advance of its delivery metrics. So that's an example of a value-add pilot. But really interestingly, it's never been repeated by an AstraZeneca clinical team subsequently. It's different in the responses we get is different in our disease area. We know what we're doing, we haven't got enough time. It's the same old issues that are brought up. So we went a slightly different way around. We just started generating patient insight very quickly through online patient communities. Again, and we saw significant changes to study delivery as a result of that insight. And this sort of clicked, the value was seen, and now by default in development here, patient insight as a result must be incorporated into protocol development. So that's a typical journey that you go through, and ultimately you have to demonstrate value to the senior leaders to get them to buy in, endorse, and then embed into business process.
Thanks, Guy. Emma?
Yeah, really quite provocative statement that I used in my meetings with the C-level folks in Grunenthal, is actually if we don't, it's as simple as this in terms of giving people ROI or kind of embedding metrics for measuring patient centricity. If we don't have patient engagement, then as an industry, we are at risk of being reprioritized in terms of our role in that patient journey, not only in recovering health, but also health and wellness before disease onset. So in simple layman's terms, I would say to the Chief Scientific Officer or the Chief Executive Officer, let's remember that these are now millennial CEOs that are coming into our industry. So they're changing the mindset of customer engagement. So I would say to them, do your patients or do the people that you want to have interactions with and relationships with, do they trust you as a pharma company as they would trust Apple, who provides them with their everyday health managing system in their iPhone? 10 years today since the first iPhone was out on the market. So in terms of buy-in and convincing people at the senior level about patient engagement, do they trust you as they trust other providers of health experiences, or do you risk being reprioritized away off the radar of a person wanting answers on their health and on their ill health? Do they trust you, or do they trust Apple?
Good question there, Emma. Ruth, would you like to share your slides at this point? Would that be a good idea? Because I think it follows quite nicely on from this topic before we move on.
Yes, that's absolutely. Are you going to actually move them on, or do I?
Yes, I'll move them on for you. I'm getting lots of comments, by the way, saying, Emma, you're bang on. So very good support there from the group. Ruth, so here's...
Okay, so I just put a couple of slides together. Just I know from my personal perspective that I always quite like to see how I like to see something quite tangible. So the first slide, which is the next slide from this, really just talks to some of the building blocks that we are working to at Teva. And I've talked to this, but this is sort of how we're communicating it internally. And as I said, this very much came from a sort of an external perspective, recognizing that when I joined Teva 2 years ago, there was some amazing work that was being done, but it hadn't really got a centralized focus, and so as a result there were some good bits happening in the US, there were some good bits happening in Europe, there's some good bits happening in Asia, but no real sort of understanding of how that was making an impact and what that actually meant. So we, as I've shared before, I very much went to my first point of call is looking outside of the business to make sure that we weren't just talking to ourselves, and listen to what the patient advocates, and it was very much the advocates that represent our patient population. Now, Teva is quite a broad company. We have specialty, we also have generics, and we also have parts of the business that repurpose medicines, and we also provide the ingredients for medicine. So we have a really broad perspective, and trying to get a clarity of what patient first actually meant or means across all of those was quite a tall ask. But this is what we have. We have 3 main themes that we work to. It's very much about early engagement, but we look at not only the research work, the R&D, but also what the reimagining and the repurposing of known innovations might mean, and this is very much links us to some of the technological advances that we're exploring of how smart technology can be attached to the medicine, and to Emma's point as well, really sort of looking at how, as we understand consumer trends, how people are using data, the digital elements, and how that is being connected with the medicines or the devices that they use. Likewise, we are very much looking at the co-creation of healthcare solutions, and we work across the world to support a phenomenal number of people who actually take our medicines, and the support programs that we provide are the accompaniment to that medicine, and it's very much about adherence. It's also about the wellness element of living with a chronic disease or an acute disease. But likewise, we're also bringing that increasing voice, and the improving health. It's a bit of a lengthy title, but I haven't found a good acronym, but I'm welcome to ideas how we can ensure that is being heard, and alongside also supporting activities which might not be best placed for Teva to take a lead on. There are some amazing initiatives that the patient advocacy and the civil community are enabling, and we want to also support. But then from the common framework perspective, I've also spent the last couple of years working on policies, and we have a colleague toolkit. We also have the CRM program that enables us to understand where across the business we're actually meeting with groups and patients. We've also introduced our global disclosure, and I work with a phenomenal group of people across the globe who are the advocacy network, and these are the folk who are actually in country building the localized relationships and understanding what it means in those countries, the reality of living with conditions. On the next slide, one of the things that I just wanted to share is who we're actually working with, and I talk about this external group, and there are a number of logos here, and I'll let you sort of explore that yourself. But this is a representation of the full Teva portfolio. Our areas of specialty interest where we have originator medicines, but as well big areas where we have generic medicines. And these are the quotes that I have been carrying for the last couple of years to pretty much everybody I meet within Teva. These are the words that have helped us build those building blocks, and these are the words of those who are representing our patients, our patient population. And then the final slide, which I just wanted to share, is very much about the guiding principles internally, and Guy was talking about this as well as, oh, this has got builds on it, I do apologise. But This is the type of communication.
I tried to remove them in the background, but couldn't.
No, please don't worry. So if you just kind of go to the final bill, this is the kind of information that we're providing to all Teva colleagues. As I mentioned at the top of the call, when I worked at Pfizer, I was very committed to the idea that there were dedicated patient advocacy colleagues. I now very much of the view that a patient-first model has to be held by every single member of the company you work with, and part of this work and this evolution of thought has led me to work with functions that in previous companies I didn't. So, for example, I'm doing a piece of work in our TGO, which is our Teva operations team, with the human resources department to look at what the future development and the training plans for our future leaders, the millennial CEOs, which Emma mentioned. What is it that we would hope that they would be able to learn at this point as they go through their development as their Teva career, to ensure that patient first is actually part of their vernacular and part of their DNA. And so I'm very excited by this work, because not only is it helping me as an individual to rethink some of the principles and the way that I was working in other companies, but it's also helping me to really engage deeper into the company in order to be able to enable something that is more sustainable and really helps Teva as a company have meaningful engagement, whether it's the individual patient or whether it's the advocate or their caregivers and their family and friends.
Thank you, Bruce. Really, really useful there. A couple of people have asked about the colleague toolkit, which you mentioned briefly. Is there anything else that you can say about that? Can you give us a bit more definition as to what that involves?
Yes, absolutely. So these guiding principles are part of the colleague toolkit, but they're also something that was made available on our website, so that the patient also can understand what they should expect from us. So the colleague toolkit is, I had to start out with a sort of how do we develop a resource that all colleagues can use, recognizing that somebody in our manufacturing plant may not have as much experience of engaging with our customers, our consumers, our patients, as somebody who works in another function. So we put together a resource which has a bit of a 101 approach to it, but it does start to open up some questions. So, for example, we talk about why patient organization engagement and why patient engagement is important, what that actually means to the company. As you can see, what these guiding principles actually are. We address some of the ethics and I should imagine legal questions that are coming in about how does this engagement fit with the codes, the compliance, the not only our Teva mission but also the policy. But then we provide some more practical resources, such as how would you make an initial contact, how would you reach out for the first time, and the resource, which is actually available via our internal system, is there so that colleagues can look at it and pull out the resources that they need based on their levels of experience. And we've also addressed how you would assess alignment with, in particular reference, the patient organization, what minimal engagement should look like, what our minimum standards are, right through to substantial engagement, so that we can start to introduce this idea that there are some relationships where you have full partnerships and it's very equal, but there are some where you may be just a funding partner. So it's sort of quite a broad document, but it really is trying to address the full spectrum of the needs of our Teva colleagues. And it's a working document, so we will continue to update it as and when either things change externally or within codes practice, but also as questions come in from our colleagues. I hope that answers the question.
Certainly does, Ruth. Thank you so much for that and taking the time to go through that in such detail. Really appreciate it. I am aware that we haven't got too much longer left. I want to do a couple of things. I'm going to read out some of the audience responses, but just before I do that, I'm just going to quickly ask one more of these. Well, I've got two more left, but we'll see. We'll do one more of these poll questions very quickly. This one's about barriers. We've heard a few things, and I can see a lot of questions about the issues people are actually having. The intention is certainly there, but the implementation is not yet. So I'm going to give you a chance to answer two of these this time. I'm very generous today. You can select two of the biggest barriers, and I'd love to see what's actually stopping you. So I'll hold that open for a few seconds. I'll let you all place your votes. Is it legacy product-focused culture? Is it a lack of skills, experience, or no dedicated roles internally? No burning platform or senior level buy-in. There's not the sense of need. Lack of vision of tangible ROI. Let's go back to Emma's elephant in the room there. There's no commercial linear route that people are seeing within their organizations. And finally, regulatory and compliance, and obviously ethics concerns as well. So I'll hold that open. Got about half of you voted. Let's just wait another 5 seconds. Come on, everyone. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. Okay, got most of you there. Let's have a look. Pretty even this time, but it's very interesting to me that the commercial issue that was mentioned has actually leapt to the top here, and that's perceived to be the biggest barrier that's actually stopping people get through. Probably quite a lot of things that we could say about that. Interesting that the burning platform one is the lowest as well. But in the interest of time, I'm going to flick straight onto another question about measurement, because people are clearly very keen on both the measurement and the compliance angles. So I wanted to make sure we addressed those. So one more question for you. This is the last one, I promise. What are the best and most practical ways of measuring this patient engagement? So obviously, I've added the word practical there because whilst we'd all love to spend time with each individual, every patient, as we've just seen in the last question, we can't do that with everybody. So one question, you only get one answer this time again, and I'm going to hold this open for a few more seconds. I've had about a third of you vote so far. So ask patients themselves, listen to their experience. Ask patients themselves, can you give them a net promoter score or some other kind of quantitative framework to use? Adherence or loyalty rates, so they are a sign of patient engagement. Hitting the internal milestones that have been prepared by your company. I imagine that's probably what does happen for most people, or something else. Have I missed out on something there? By the way, if you do choose something else, then write in what you think that should be in the Q&A box. Tell us what you think should be the best way of measuring. Right, I've got about 2/3 of you voted, so I will close that now and let's have a look at the results. Thank you. Okay, so this one is pretty polarized. Listen to their experience is quite clearly with nearly 2/3 of the vote there. Idealist, maybe? I don't know. Who wants to come onto this one first? Whoever likes to go first can comment on this. Silence. Anyone?
I'm quite happy to. Oh, so Guy, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to comment on the last one in terms of the burning platform and the ROI, because I think the burning platform R&D is here and it's here now, and our cost base is enormous, and we struggle to get patients into our study programs. We struggle to keep them in. 20% drop out, and the rest who do stay in the study programs, we have problems with complying with the protocol. And we have a huge amount of missing data. And our solution has just been to throw more patients at the problem. And I think, you know, we absolutely, in terms of return on investment, and are demonstrating tangible returns on reducing the cost of our programs and making studies faster, more efficient, delivering more quickly. I think there's good examples of that. I think this is where most companies are now, the penny has dropped, and a number of companies are looking at patient engagement within the clinical study paradigm. And that's where I think the fastest progress is being made today. In terms of the commercial end in clinical practice in terms of the medicines piece, no pharma company's gone bust. So there's a little bit of resting on our laurels here, but we know that the majority of patients in most of our core disease areas stop taking our medicines within 12 months of them being prescribed. But we're getting enough new patients into the system that keeps it sort of viable. I think that is going to change very quickly when the payers cotton on and clock the fact that there's more value if they're paying for payment by results than actually for the cost of the medicine. That changes the whole paradigm completely, because we cannot sit back and allow most of the patients, a lot of the patients, to stop taking the medicines, because they won't get the benefits in terms of experience and outcome, and we won't get paid accordingly. So I think there is a burning platform. It's here and recognised, and we're making good shift in R&D. It is coming in the commercial world very quickly.
You heard it here. Thank you, Guy. Passionate. I like it. Anyone else?
Yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, or just make an observation about the measuring patient engagement. And obviously, this is something that a number of companies are struggling with, and it's a really interesting question, and we can most probably have a whole webinar on it. I think the part of the sort of the measurement is also understanding what it is we're actually trying to do by the different types of engagement, whether that is to improve engagement for a patient, or the dialogue between a healthcare professional and an engagement. The measurements associated with that level of engagement and how we kind of enable that voice to be heard by a different audience and is one thing. Likewise, on the adherence and loyalty rates, the work that we do within the patient support program does measure that, and we've had some really interesting data over a 10-year period be used by the NHS in England to look at what the value of not only support, working with, accompanying the individual, working with them through some of the challenges they're having around adherence and persistence and medicine administration, to actually be able to provide that value proposition. So I think I just wanted to make the observation that for me, we're still exploring what measurement of patient engagement actually means, and it's interesting it's so polarized, because actually there is a real lack in many areas of the healthcare system, as well as whether that be in England or globally or just in Europe, to hear that voice. But I think it's just really interesting, and it's something that I know that we're still at Teva trying to explore and understand from the multiple areas of engagement that we have with people outside of the business.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. Emma, any final words before we finish?
I just want to kind of finish, really, from any contributions I can make by speaking to Ruth. Earlier you said that perhaps we need an acronym, and this whole webinar is around an infrastructure, or creating an infrastructure on engagement. And my role is always to put the patient perspective into any engagement infrastructure that I create within pharma companies. So I would say we need to be looking at how we add value to that patient's life. So that's where the acronym of BREATHE has come from. So very quickly, we need to think about engagement programs that boost a patient's life, not boast about a product. The R bit is being real, issues are authentic, and the products work in the real world. That we look to entertain. It's really hard work as a patient, having to live with a condition. So we can entertain and make light where appropriate. Action, we need to activate people to take better care of themselves, not inundate them with information. We need to have T in the BREATHE acronym, which is trust. So let your patients know you as an organisation. H is for help. We need to provide channels and tech that patients can contribute to. And the last thing is we need to recognise as an industry on the BREATHE acronym that we have earned our right to engage with patients. So we as an industry need to be more visible. We need to be more human and upfront with our patients. So as an infrastructure, as a simple infrastructure from the patient perspective, how do we ensure that there's patient-centered care within our organisations? Let's breathe life into our patient engagement.
Thank you so much, Emma. A very nice way to finish, and I hope, again, you had your pens out during that. But one of the things that we panelists have been discussing in our little back-channel chat window that we have here is what on earth are we going to do about this next? Because I'm acutely aware that we've run out of time, but we have, in front of me, I have a big screen full of your questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. We've also had to skirt across some of the issues just in the interest of time as well. We've been suggesting whether or not we need a follow-up webinar. We've been suggesting whether or not we should produce some written answers to some of those questions between us and send it out to all of you. What I would really like to do, there are still more than 250 people listening to me right now on this call, and of course there's, as I mentioned at the beginning, there were 1,300 people who signed up originally, so lots of people. Could you possibly, before you leave, send me a single sentence in that Q&A box and tell me what specifically you would like us to do about answering some of those key questions? And obviously, if you have specific issues, then say what they are so that we know exactly what to focus on. That's the only way in which we know that we can progress from here, as I hope you feel that today's been a pretty good session, but in many ways it can only be an introduction, and that's all that is achievable almost in an hour. I hope it's been helpful to sort of see what the rest of the audience thinks as well. And I can see a few of you writing in now, but do try and be specific as you possibly can. Be greedy, in fact. Tell us exactly what you want, and we will do our best to deliver. Do want to point out as well before you go that there's a couple of little things at the bottom of the page in front of you, which are a couple of events that we have planned. If you thought today's session was useful, then face-to-face would be even better, right? So come along to either our event in London on October 19-20 or to our event in Philadelphia just a couple of weeks later on November 2nd and 3rd, and have a look at those links underneath if you want some more information, because we are literally in the process of launching those events as we speak, so you won't have seen them before. Yes, time flies very fast, and I appreciate all the comments that are coming in right now. I will also send through on the window for you a couple of links to the conference brochures for those just as we disappear. I want to say a huge thank you to firstly all of you who've stayed on the line after we've breached our hour, and I really appreciate that. And of course to the three experts, smiling faces that you can see in front of you, who've graciously given up their time, energy, effort, and intellect and shared with us today through nothing other than the kindness of their own hearts. So really appreciate their time and anything, of course, that we can extract from them post-webinar as well. So if you've enjoyed it, would love to hear more from you. Just send a little message. I'll keep the webinar open for about another couple of minutes so that you've got time to write in. And otherwise, I hope to see you face-to-face at one of those two events. It'd be lovely to be able to connect with you and take this further. Such a vital topic for our industry, but one that we're clearly making progress on, even if the intentions at the moment are slightly ahead of where we are in terms of implementation. There was clearly a strong desire from all of you there. Great to see you and speak to you soon. Thanks, everyone.